you have to speak earlier?
Yeah, it's a short thing at a council summit.
Hold on, there we go. Good afternoon, I'm Megan Kuhlman. I'm a manager of councils and committees with AVIXA, and I welcome you to today's Designing for Equity, Inclusion, and Accessibility session. It's an honor to be here today because it means I'm representing our council chair, and he's helped us put this together, our moderator. I'm going to introduce him up, but I first want to thank our sponsor for today's session, Crestron. Please make sure you got a pin. They're walking around. We'll make sure you get one before you leave. And with no further ado, I'd like to introduce the moderator of today's panel, Frank Padikkala, not only our moderator, but the Diversity Council Chair.
All right, hey everyone, thank you so much for joining us on the Tech Innovation stage. This is an AVIXA Diversity Council panel. We have an amazing set of panelists in Althea and Chris, and Dr. Shelby Hill will kick things off with his keynote address. But before we get into that, this fact that we are on this stage today means that diversity matters to so many people. And I like to kick things off with a quote that I always quote on any opportunity I get. Maya Angelou once said, "In diversity, there's beauty. In diversity, there is strength." Understanding that our individual, unique diversity journeys can be equally accepted and combined to make something special is what makes the audiovisual industry so great. We are, at our core, all lovers of technology, and that is our unifying commonality. And today, as we talk about this panel and touch on the different elements of designing for equity and how to be intentional in your diversity practices, we hope that we can inspire change in your lives, in your organizations, in your departments, and make this a more inclusive environment. And without much ado, I'd like to introduce Dr. Shelby Hill. He's going to be handling our keynote address. Thank you, Dr. Shelby.
Thank you. Thank you, Frank. Hi, everybody. Thank you. Thank you. A warm welcome of applause. Can you guys hear me okay? Fantastic. Thanks, Frank. I appreciate that. It feels peaceful to be amongst family here and friends here at Infocom and AVIXA. It's a good-looking crowd. So I just want to take a moment to just really confide in everyone about something that's kind of been on my mind, been on my conscience since I've been preparing for this. Many years ago, I made 4 conscious decisions about my career. The first conscious decision was to go to college. The second was to climb the corporate ladder. The third was to go back and get a graduate degree. And then the fourth conscious decision was to go back and continue to climb the corporate ladder, right? But after 8 years or so in the workforce, I had some realizations about some systemic barriers that I was facing that perhaps indirectly or, slowed the progress of my career. My confession to you is I truly felt that the game was rigged, and I wasn't going to realize my goals to be a senior leader in an organization or an executive leader in an organization. But when I think back during those times in the 1990s, in the 2000s, early 2000s, there really wasn't a lot of organizational awareness going on. I guess in other words, most companies at that time, they weren't really thinking back, they weren't really thinking about organizational identity or awareness. They weren't thinking about leader diversity or about designing a diverse and inclusive culture for the workplace. But on the other hand, there were some companies that, were self-aware. And they were very intentional about their diversity in terms of culture and leadership. And I'm certain that their efforts to be aware and about designing an inclusive leadership and culture, I'm confident that they paid intangible dividends to their organization and their leadership in their respective markets. So, what am I saying? The thing is, much like my conscious company, those conscious companies back then made deliberate actions to actually attract and retain diverse talent that had led them to be leaders in their respective markets. My conscious decision back then as a high school kid to date have led me to be right here in front of you to talk about diversity and what leadership, your leadership, can do to further embed the significance of DEI in your workplace culture, in the walls of your organization, in the veins of your employees. So for that, I want to thank you so much for having me be here today. So when I think about a conscious company, John Rennish, he's an author about human consciousness, and he stated, becoming conscious is becoming aware of something, then acting responsibly in light of the new awareness. When I think about diversity today, I think more companies are conscious about and being intentional about their DEI branding. I think that's become a lot more evident these days. But when I think about it a little bit further, if you look at LinkedIn, I'm sure we have some LinkedIn fans out here, right? I've seen a lot of companies and employees and recruiters for companies in LinkedIn posting pictures of new hires and new promotions and work anniversaries and growth, market growth and all these different things. So it makes me think, I say, well, someone was very intentional about being inclusive to capture this picture. So a picture speaks 1,000 words. So I'm sure this could speak a few things for everybody, right? So when I look at this picture, I see, fun. I see joy. I see engagement. I see, pride, happiness. I see potentially somebody celebrating maybe a 50th birthday because there's coffins in the middle there. But I wonder the other thing. Does the picture really capture the culture of this organization, right? You see diversity in that picture, but does this snapshot reflect the diverse voices of employees or diverse leadership across all levels of the organization? Now, I can't be sure in this case, but in your cases, your company conscience and identity is what your team members say it is. Now, today organizations, their mantra in the DEI space is bring your whole self to work. Diversity is cool, it's accepted now, right? So, if you have tattoos, bring your whole self to work. If you wear your hair curly or kinky, natural, bring your whole self to work. If you're gay, lesbian, transgender, bring your whole self to work. And I think that's fantastic. I think it's great. I love it. It's a wonderful thing. I want to share with you, can we see those numbers? If you add these numbers up, they will not necessarily equal zero, literally, but they will figuratively. And here's what I mean. 26 years I've been in the workforce. I've had 12 leadership roles. I worked in 5 industries, 13 different leaders. I have 1 male leader who was white. I had 11 female leaders, 2 were black, and 9 were white women. 10 times in my career, I was the only male on the leadership team. 2 times, I was the only person of color and only male on the leadership team. So I have another confession to make. As a person of color, as a black man, as an African American, not one time did I feel like I could be my whole self at work. The 0 is a reflection of what was my reality during my career. So why am I sharing this with you? Well, I started out this conversation by sharing that, my conscious decisions are what led me to this point, to this podium before you today. So let me tell you how consciousness can affect you. As a conscious company, your diversity efforts, they have to be consciously inclusive. And I want to say that again, your diversity efforts have to be consciously inclusive. The one time where I was the only employee, the only person of color, the other time I was the only male and person of color on the leadership team, there just simply wasn't a lot of space for me to be my whole self. Now, when I say that, I want you to understand that the environment, it was unintentionally flooded with universal commonalities that my non-minority colleagues shared, and it just simply smothered me out. And what's interesting about that, and I want to share this with you, is one day I was having a one-on-one with my leader. And she humbly admitted to me, because we would talk about a variety of things. She was very transparent. And she admitted to me that the team at the time, they were unconsciously focused on culture fit. In other words, they were really hiring based on, oh, she looks like me. She makes me feel comfortable. She sounds like me. We have this in common. And what that did for me versus hiring for culture fit, I mean, they really should have been hiring for culture add, right? Where they could bring in diverse experience, diverse perspective, diverse knowledge. So needless to say, once they became conscious about their blind spot, I have to commend them that they were very conscious and intentional about changing their environment, right? Now, I want to be clear, they did hire me, but they didn't hire me to meet a quota, right? They hired me because they saw my experience, my knowledge, my talent, my skills. I just happened to be a qualified black candidate, why they hired me. I've since moved on from that organization and launched my own leadership development consulting company to address such leadership and diversity opportunities. But I want to share with you, and I thought this was really interesting. It was a gay woman, a gay white woman, in her early 40s, who raised this huge blind spot for her senior leadership within their human resources department. She was the best leader I ever had in my entire career. She and I went on to do wonders in the organization. We went on to do wonders in the Department of Leadership and Development and Human Resources. She's now a director within that organization, and she's doing pretty well. So how does a company become self-aware while making DEI accessible and embedded throughout the organization? Well, I'm sure everyone's familiar with your employee journey, right? The employee journey, where you talk about, when you recruit, you onboard, you engage, you develop, you progress. And even at the exit strategy, you should be getting feedback about what your diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts look like in terms of why an employee is leaving the organization. So this is what some companies are doing. So I think we're pretty familiar with a lot of these, right? Now, these companies have technologies to support there are a lot of technologies out here. These technologies support blind screening on job candidates so that profiles are assessed fairly and that recruiters and hiring managers don't take into account candidate information that may influence hiring decisions. They have technologies designed to help examine the text of job descriptions before reviews, performance reviews, and even internal communications that might seem offensive or alienate people within your organization. And actually, many of these providers that you see, and then some, they also have technology that has been created specifically for the purpose-built reports and dashboards for DEI and includes the diversity, equity, and inclusion analysis. These types of tools by these organizations and more, they provide the kind of analytics that can help organizations measure the actual impact of their DEI-specific initiatives. And I think that's extremely important. So for example, the organization can actually use analytic technology to assess whether using more inclusive language for job advertisements actually does improve the diversity of their applicant pools. So often in the consulting that I've done, I've worked with organizations and they say, well, where do we get the talent? Where do we get the talent? So they end up going to one particular pool of talent. Well, that talent is not diverse, so they continue getting the same type of talent. You don't know that there's other organizations out there or other pools of talent unless you start to leverage the tools that could take you to the diverse pools of talent. So having said that, I would say this. No longer are the days that the employer has the upper hand, right? It's about a 50-50 split now. Employers are interviewing candidates, and candidates are interviewing employees or employers. Prospects are vetting culture, community engagement of companies, employee satisfaction, growth, community, social engagement, to decide all of these different things before they even decide whether they want to apply for your company. And if they do, trust me, they're conscious of your recruiting team, they're conscious of your hiring manager, they're conscious of your leadership team. Low-hanging fruit that most organizations miss is their website. Most candidates go to your website and they look at your leadership, the About page, and when they see that there's no diversity in the About page, they don't apply because they don't see any representation of them for their organization. So you're losing talent right off the bat in that regard. Now, before this talk, while I was doing research here, I looked up the top 5 and bottom 5 AV leaders in the world. And I viewed their websites. Only 3 had culturally diverse leadership teams. So that's 3 out of 10 that had a diverse leadership team, culturally. So websites are the biggest miss. So here's what I would say to you, AV. You guys have an incredible opportunity to lead change within your industry. So with that being said, let's talk about being whole. Being whole. To be a conscious company, you must allow your people to be whole. Now, I want to go back in time a little bit. I want you to take a moment to think about the barriers of bringing your whole self to the workplace once upon a time, decades ago. Remember when women couldn't even work in the workforce at one point? Sexual preference had to be concealed, or sexual orientation had to be concealed because it was taboo. Workspace was actually segregated, right? So there was no innovation and collaboration across cultures. And even more so, we had to compartmentalize our behaviors and our personalities. We couldn't show up as our whole selves in the workplace, so we worked in silos. And in some cases, we're still working in silos. But I want you to take a second and look around you right now. Just look around. Does it look like anything in that picture today? No. It's amazing how things have changed, right? We should be proud. I will give yourselves a round of applause. We got a diverse audience in here today. Now, although I'm not working for anyone per se, I still have to navigate to work and navigate the work-life balance paradigm, just like I did when I was going into a corporate organization. See, what we're recognizing now is that the two worlds have always really been integrated. We just weren't allowed to talk about it the way that we're allowed to talk about it now, right? We know that they've all been the same. Show of hands if your work husband or work wife is here today. Okay, a handful, nobody said, I don't want to get anybody into trouble. Okay? But if you're like me, my work wife, she is my real wife, and the same person that I work with because she works remotely as well as I do. But I want you to think about it for a second. My work life and my home life, they're really not that different. And I'm not that different either. And my guess is that most of us aren't that different at work as we are at home. That would be my guess. Now, at home, in my whole life, my whole life and my work life, it helps me be a whole 6'4" Shelby, the person that I am, right? That's who I am. So at home, I am my whole self. I wear the appropriate uniform to accommodate today's events. My mental and emotional health is important to me. The way I behave with my family is expected to be respectful, supportive, collaborative, and all that good stuff. At home, my intentions are considerate, my actions are purposeful, my performance on handling my daily chores and my honey-do list, they're all evaluated on a very subjective sliding scale, right? But it's all evaluation done the same. And so when you look at my home life, which I'm saying is probably the same for many of you, that's what it looks like for the most part. And I don't think that it's much different from my work life. Anybody disagree with that? Yeah, it's pretty much the same. So it's time that we be our whole selves all the time. Can you say that with me? I want to be my whole self all the time. Can you say that with me? I want to be my whole self all the time. Yes, all the time. So how do we get there, right? We're trending in some new waters here, right? So how do we get there? So organizations need to integrate a safe space for balancing work and life. And it needs to be a safe space beyond just, being able to see my dog or my kid in, my Zoom background here, right? We need to go beyond just that. It needs to be integrated in the things that we do. So organizations have to be much more self-aware and understand that we need to embrace who we are. So can I share some advice? I'm just going to share 4 things with you as for advice. If you got a pen and paper, you can write it down. 1, we need to understand your organizational identity as a whole. So for example, do a behavioral assessment, do DISC if you haven't, do Myers-Briggs, understand what your personalities are, your behaviors are for your organization, what your people are. Do a talent succession assessment to get a holistic view of what you look like as an organization in terms of performance, leadership aptitude, and also diversity. The second thing I would say is get to the root of your identity. Prioritize and align your strategic imperative to include DI at every stage and attach a DI component at every stage of your initiatives. That's how we begin the integration. The third thing is leverage the uniqueness of your original individuality. So what do I mean by that? Connect the device talent that you have in your organization. Connect that talent and perspective and experience to drive the organizational objectives and initiatives. So, that could look like basically promoting within for culture add versus culture fit. So those are 4 pieces of advice I would give you. And if you have, the 4th one is, if you have a diversity council and if you don't have our ERGs, get one, design one, include one, use it. It's diverse. You're going to get a diverse environment. You're going to get diverse innovations. Now, here's what others are doing. So I went off the beaten path with a lot of other new tech companies that are coming up and coming, and here's what they're doing. You take SAX Institute, it's an AI organization. They offer 35-hour work weeks to help with the work-life balance. Insano, they're cloud and infotech. They promote a work-life balance through a variety of cool perks like sabbatical leave, paid volunteer days. Now Secure, they're mobile and cybersecurity. They offer flexible work from home places, video game competitions, and company outings. Affinitive, which is a cool one, they do ad tech and automotive. They offer perks like on-site gym, progressive parental leave, remote working options, unlimited PTO, and paid volunteer days. And then you have Chipotle, they have a wellness rewards. MasterCard, I think, has a pretty cool one. They offer volunteer days. Now, this is a little bit different. They give you up to 5 paid days per year to volunteer and join community outreach initiatives. In addition to that, they have a volunteer incentive program. So what they do is when you lend your time, they'll make it worth your while for up to $500, for $500 donations per year, which is $2,000 total, to organizations where you give your time for 40 hours or more. They're helping drive the movement for work-life balance. So what am I saying? I'm saying basically that there are 5 generations currently in the workforce. We cannot develop and lead the way that we've always developed and led. We need to live, we live in a diverse and dynamic world. We're finally acknowledging that the workplace in itself is a world that is a living organism with living human beings that operate it. It grows, it shrinks, it has feelings, it changes, it breathes, it's resilient, it succeeds, and sometimes it fails. It's a world in which human experience, we feel joy, we feel pain, we feel success, we feel failure, we feel very much some of the similar things that an organization feels as human beings. So what we do within our organization impacts. It has impact, it matters. So sadly, for many of us, the workplace is not a safe space. And we have to make it a safe space intentionally and collectively. So you have to ask, does that feeling of freedom, of being whole, permeate throughout the organization? And if that doesn't ring true for your organization, you can change that. And a couple of ideas here that I've worked with some companies here and in other organizations, they've created, one created a culture code, AVI-SPL. They did a culture code around diversity, equity, inclusion. Another did, they're in the healthcare system, they did service standards that were applicable to their employees and to their consumers. So they kept me safe, they loved me, they made it easy, and they owned it. So these are things that you can drive your culture, you can use to drive your culture. These constructs are universal language that everyone understands, they can trust, and they will honor throughout the company. Here's what I want to share with you real quick. The word diversity is a noun. It's a thing. It's an inanimate thing. It can't feel and it can't speak. The word leadership is also a noun, and it's inanimate. It can't feel and it can't think. The word people is also a noun. However, it is a living thing. It can feel and it can speak. So diversity and leadership have been present and a part of our world and transformation since the beginning of mankind, right? What continuously changes is not diversity, that's the constant that we experience, but it's leadership that makes the difference. So leadership as a thing, it doesn't see race or people. Leadership as a thing doesn't see hate. People see hate. Leadership as a thing doesn't see gender, age, sexual preference. Only people see these labels. We've entered a time of individuality and influence. It's about human being who you are, being your whole self in the workplace. It's no longer an option, it's an expectation. And with those expectations, there are responsibilities and actions that have to follow. And I would say that in the case of fostering a diverse culture within your organization, that responsibility goes with the privilege of leadership. So in other words, people in leadership positions must step up to drive the whole person culture within their organizations. So I want to ask you, I asked you earlier if you want to be your whole self all the time. Can we say that again? I want to be my whole self all the time. Be impeccable with your influence as a conscious company. Now, I like to see influences of what I call individual originals. They're one of a kind. Now, are there any influencers in here? Raise your hand if you're an influencer. Not the TikTok kind. Okay. So we got a couple of influencers, okay. All right, so I want to share a story with you. I went to an interracial middle school in high school, and as a younger kid, I went to a predominantly black elementary school. Now, I remember being in about the third grade, and I really began to notice how kids were all different ages, Asian, white, Hispanic, black, different heights, different sizes, different hairs. Why is his hair blonde? Why is her hair short? Why does her hair feel this way? Why is her hair long, lengthy, all these different things. As I became more self-aware, I realized my uniqueness. I was taller, I could run fast, I was confidently awkward. So somewhere along the way, I decided to leverage my individual originality, and I became a bully. Now, as I became more self-aware, this wasn't, something I was proud of. I mean, it was a brief period between 8 and 10 years old. I was a bad influence. Now, you might be wondering how a child between 8 and 10 years old could be, a bad influence. And I'm sure if you have kids, you know how kids between 8 and 10 years old can be a bad influence, right? But that was the route that I took. And I remember that I bullied Mark Griffith for an entire year, taking his lunch money literally every day, stashing it in my Converse shoebox in my closet. I fought almost once a week, whether it was in school, at the bus stop, after school. I would steal from our neighborhood baseball concession stand, and then I would steal actually the candy from the neighborhood concession stand, and then I'd intimidate a few kids at school to sell it for me and give me the profits after school, give me the cash after school. So I guess actually you could say I was an influencer, right? Pretty much. But of course, my parents found out, and I got in trouble and all that, and with Mark, and the fights were intercepted by my dad. But what was cool is that my mom, she had an idea for me to try out for the recreational baseball team. It was down the street, and I made the team. As I grew up, I got into more sports. In junior high, I discovered basketball. The game came pretty natural to me. I was named captain of the team. And it was the first time I heard the phrase, lead by example. I had no true understanding of what that actually meant. But I grew I knew I liked winning, so I knew how to influence my teammates. And so by influencing my teammates, what happened was I became more of a leader in that regard. So here's me, a freshman year, as a leader in an organization. So I share this with you for one reason: individual originality. You're all individuals. You're all unique. You all have influence and power. How impeccable are you with your influence and power? So before I leave you, I want to share with you one thing. All organizations go through strategic initiatives every year. They sit together, they talk about things like employee engagement, employee experience, culture transformation. They talk about what their goals are for the year. And my encouragement to you and your organizations is to tie a DEI initiative to each one of those imperatives. And that's how you integrate DEI into your organization. With that being said, I highly recommend that what you do is make DEI one of your imperatives, but put it on the list. Make it number one. Make it number one in your organization, because it's the foundation of your organization's most valuable commodity, and that is the people. That is definitely the people. And then I would share with you, ask yourself these questions. Who are we? Who do we want to be? What are the others doing? Look at other organizations, other industries to see what they're doing. How do we want to lead as an organization? And are we committed to the things that we said we would be committed to our people? So, a few things that you want to do, just to recap. You want to be consciously inclusive. You want to allow your employees to be whole. Be impeccable with your intentions to influence. And be committed to follow through within your organization. Now, I began this conversation by sharing with you my conscious decisions that led me to stand here before you today. Now, I'm grateful for that opportunity, but I also shared a confession or two with you about feeling that the system was rigged. Maybe it was rigged back then, but there's no excuse for it to be today. So, I believe that companies' culture is lost when diverse voices go unheard and its leadership commitment is absent. And that I encourage you to lead better as individuals, as influencers, and as organizations. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Shelby. That was amazing. I hope it was insightful. The title of our panel today is Designing for Equity, Inclusion, and Accessibility. And because we are a technology industry, what we like to do is also bring to our panel some amazing voices that I have the utmost respect for to share their thoughts and their perspective from the industry that we know and love. On stage, we have with Dr. Hill, we have Chris Fitzpatrick and Althea Rickets. I don't want to do the introductions for them. They are extremely famous people, but I would like them to share their own introductions and give us a little bit about your diversity journey yourself. I'll kick things off with Althea.
Hello, everyone. My name is Althea Rickets. I work at Shure Incorporated. I'm the Associate Vice President of Corporate Initiatives. I work with our CEO to drive our inclusion, diversity, equity, and access initiatives. Note inclusion is first. We'll talk about that. And also our sustainability initiatives, as well as I oversee our program management office. I got stories to tell people.
Chris.
And I am Chris Fitzpatrick. I am the manager of University Relations and Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Crestron Electronics. I've been doing diversity and inclusion work for about 15 years now, and I oversee Crestron's internship and co-op program, as well as some of the work that we're doing on the DEI front, as well as working with military veterans.
Awesome. Thank you, Chris and Althea. Thank you, Dr. Hill, again.
Thank you.
We have a QR code that's coming up every now and then, so if you do have questions, feel free to share them. We can talk to the panel if time permitting. So I want to kick things off with a question to you, Althea. How do we go about designing a DEI initiative?
That's kind of a no-brainer question. I see the fabulous Kay Sargent in the audience. She just did a talk in the UK about designing for diversity, equity, and inclusion. So the conversation has started, right? We're talking about it. So that's the beginning. These folks that I see in the room, you're interested. You're allies, you're leaders. So we start by communicating. And for me, when you say you've been doing it for 15 years, I think you've been doing it all your life. I've been doing it all my life. I come from Jamaica. I have a different perspective than a Black African American. I'm a part of the conversation. So we start by communicating. And the folks that are here, my expectation is that what you learn today, you will go out and teach someone else. And it will teach someone else. That's how we start.
Awesome. Thank you, Althea. So you mentioned communication, and as people are walking the Infocom show floor, you're going to hear that word repeated across every single booth, because that's what we do. We facilitate communication. Now, Chris, you represent a manufacturer that is the forefront of creating that communication, meeting equity, how to create better meetings, how to have better events. So let's talk about that. How do we do that? What is Crestron's perspective on it? What is your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and Frank, it's a great question. It's also a really timely one because just a few weeks ago, Crestron's CEO, Dan Feldstein, had an article in Forbes magazine about the topic of meeting equity and focusing on the technology that will bring individuals together to communicate, exactly as you said, Althea, regardless of if they're on-site, if they're remote, if they're hybrid, if they're working from home, if they're taking a call from a car, they can feel as though they're part of the conversation no matter what. So it's bringing everybody together on a more equitable footing, with the idea being that anybody can have a seat at that meeting table, right? It starts to remove, the technology starts to remove that proximity bias that says that you will get more out of a meeting if you are there in the room versus if you are joining in remotely. This applies to diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility in so many ways, because what it means is that we can open the door wider for more different people who can't be a part of the office culture, right? The single parent, the individual with disabilities, the neurodiverse, who can now have a seat at that table the same way anybody else would, to be heard, to be seen, to be appreciated, to be respected. And I think that that's something in this industry that we have right at our fingertips. That's a responsibility that we have in what we can do to create the technology and to create the spaces where everybody can be part of leadership, can be part of conversations, and everyone can, as you said, Dr. Hill, be their full selves in the workplace.
So I have a follow-up to that. I mean, we talk about meeting equity through technology, and it would seem that we have several solutions to cater to that, right? But at the end of the day, no technology is greater than the user. And a lot of companies have challenges on that front with, even though they have the technology to create those equitable, diverse, inclusive environments, they are still not able to do that. And that points to a lack of skill. I'm not sure. Dr. Hill, you are a trainer, you help organizations come to that forefront. What are those skills? Like, how can a company improve on that? How can they create a better, equitable environment?
Yeah, well, I think it's more of them having, as I mentioned, they have to identify who they are as an organization and identify what their growth gaps are and what their strengths are, and then know how to improve those or build on those so that they can know what skills are lacking and what skills are strong, and build from there. I think a lot of times what I see, in fact, a lot of times what I see what organizations do from a leadership perspective is they think they know what the people need to do the job from up here in the ivory tower, so to speak, but they don't go to the people to figure out what the people need and what skills they need in order to be able to scale ability and include technology so that people can be inclusive and create an inclusive environment. So, understand your organizational identity and tap into your population to find out their boots to the ground. Find out what's needed from your people versus, making these leadership assumptions.
So what I'm hearing, Dr. Hale, is that there's no real one-size-fits-all approach that you can take to these things.
Absolutely.
So I'm going to follow up the same question to both Althea and Chris. And Althea, as someone in a leadership role in a massive organization, and as someone who's designed solutions and systems like this, how do you go about approaching training and getting the organization to just be more inclusive?
Okay, so I'm glad you bring up inclusion, because I think there's a growing thought that inclusion means exclusion, right? Meaning if you're talking about inclusion, it means that all of a sudden there will be exclusion for, let's just say it, our white male colleagues. No. There is a huge pie that can be sliced and shared. So when we talk about what is required, it's listening to everyone. It's listening to our allies, our white male allies. It's listening to our black males. It's listening to those that are part of the LGBTQ plus community. Because guess what? News travels like this. I was in Jamaica, and within seconds, I heard about what was happening in Texas. It matters. You need to be part of the conversation. So I don't know if I directly answered your question, but I wanted to make sure I pointed out inclusion does not mean exclusion.
Absolutely. And Chris, you also come at it with a very unique perspective, because you were both handling DEI, university relations, and universities are meant to be diverse at its core. That is the success story of the entire higher ed market there. So
Yeah, absolutely. And I love the slide, Dr. Hill, that you had about the generations in the workforce. And one of the real fascinating things on the university side, Frank, to your point, universities, colleges, trade schools, high schools, education is a place where diversity comes together and thrives. Mm-hmm. It just, you tend to see those two things existing in a fair amount of harmony. So when you are recruiting at the university level, or when you're building a program similar to the internship program that we have at Crestron, inherent in that is a mission of inclusivity. Because if we're going to appeal to that generation of job seekers, we have to be inclusive because they demand it. We have to be active in the community because they demand it. We have to practice sustainability because they demand it. There's far more focus on the next generation of job seekers on value alignment in a company than ever before. And from a staffing standpoint, which I've heard some rumors that's been a little bit of a challenge for the last year or so, opening as wide of a door to as many different types of people, that's a business strategy. That's not just a DEI strategy. Yeah. That's also how we succeed at finding the best talent out there. I also think it's important when we're having conversations about equity and inclusion and accessibility, and an organization is struggling to make that happen or put that together, not to automatically ascribe negative intent to it. It doesn't mean that organization is actively seeking to marginalize a group. It may mean that they're struggling with change management. It may mean that they're used to doing things, they've been successful a certain way, and the idea of changing that mission can be a little frightening. And I want to say 10, 11 years ago, before I was in the AV industry, I was speaking with a hiring manager at a company. I was trying to help him find somebody for a sales team. I said, tell me a little bit about your ideal candidate. What do you want somebody to come in here and do? And I was expecting to hear about skills. I was expecting to hear about the techniques and the approaches. And he looks me in the eye and says, you know what I'm looking for? I'm looking for what I call drinkability. So what is that? He says, well, I want you to find me somebody that I would want to go and have a beer with after work. And I remember looking at him with just this stunned look in my face. So what you're saying is that you want somebody who's essentially just like you. Mm-hmm. You don't want somebody who needs to go home to a family every night. Yep. You know, they're caregivers, they're caretakers. You want value fit, yep, or culture fit, not culture add. Yep. And that was a much different conversation after that.
I'm going to follow up a question to you. I mean, I'm uniquely privileged and blessed to be the chair of the Avixa Diversity Council. And what that's given me is the opportunity to be an amazing listener. I listen to a lot of people. I just listen. I love these stories, right? And one of the common refrains, and you mentioned that while you were speaking, is that everything was fine the way it was. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. People like that, that status quo. We don't want to change it. It was okay. We didn't have a problem before. Clearly there is.
Yeah, fine for who?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so the point is, and I'm going to actually ask something that Althea mentioned. So inclusion does not mean exclusion.
Right.
And on our panel, we have you, Chris, and I'm going to ask you, how do we build that allyship? And I'd love Althea to kind of elaborate as well. I want both your opinions on this, because we need allyship. How do we work on that? How do we do that?
Yeah, and this can be a challenge because I think allyship exists at its finest form when it's woven into the culture of the organization itself, right? You can feel a culture of allyship in an organization when folks like myself, white males who have a certain privilege, can speak up for marginalized communities and say, this is what we need to do in order to be more innovative, right? To have a better culture, to find better talent, to also our customers, right? To work better in our communities. This is something we need to do. And it can be something just as simple as when there's a meeting that's a predominantly male-led meeting, and there is a woman in that meeting with really great ideas, but can't get those words out to the forefront because somebody's always talking over her. Mm-hmm. The ally is the person who says, hold on a second, I really want to hear what this person has to say. It's a very simple but very powerful gesture. And Dr. Hill, you mentioned this earlier, it's about being intentional about it. We have to be intentional about it until it becomes automatic, until DEI becomes a reflex.
Althea, same question.
I want to share a story with you. Rosalind Brewer. Does anyone know who she is? Lexus does. She is the CEO of Walgreens, one of the Fortune 500 companies. She was at a CEO event where all CEOs was. And then one of the CEOs came up to her and said, oh, so what are you doing? What are you doing here? She said, what? He's like, what are you doing here? I'm at a CEO event, so I'm a CEO. He's like, really? Really? She went to later share. She got up out of her chair because not only was she at the event, she was a keynote speaker. Got up on the event and got up to the podium. And if you could take a snapshot of his look on his face when he saw her get up on the podium, priceless. I've been asked if I'm the only one in my family that has an MBA. My mother has an MBA, my brother has an MBA. Did you ask this colleague here? No, you didn't. Allyship, my biggest ally was a white man who was a VP of sales at my company. Allyship is needed, is required.
Yeah.
I can't do this alone. I can't move the needle. So I am excited to see all the allies in this audience. I'm excited to see my VP of marketing sitting over there, a great ally for me. So absolutely, allyship is needed as we move the needle. And moving the needle is what we're doing, right? Because this has been here since the dawn of time.
And Dr. Hill, can you just add something to that as well?
Yeah, it's interesting because I'm working with a company and we're trying to, there's a beta program that we created and it's around allyship, but we're calling it endorsement. So in my career, I've had one or two people endorse me, right? And it sounds different, maybe it sounds less threatening, but we're testing it to see if more of the more privileged leadership endorses those who need endorsement and support to see if leadership, if they get more applications for leadership positions, if promotions happen more, just to see where it takes them because they're getting their senior and middle leadership involved to be intentional about endorsing others. So.
Well, thank you so much, all of you. I mean, there's a ton of questions that we still had. We're not going to be able to get to it, but just letting you know, the Diversity Council and the panelists are going to be joining us in the All Council Lounge, so you can come over there, interact with us. There's an opportunity to network all the way up to 4 p.m. But thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, panelists. You were all awesome. Let's keep talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.